Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's first annual HCMG Digital Summit, Steering an Effective Federal Workforce in Times of Change, sponsored by Cornerstone on Demand. We're kicking off our first session today, Workforce and Succession Planning, Reshaping Outdated Models and Upgraded Obsolete Tools, with two very talented speakers. Now, before we kick things off, I'd like to bring everyone's attention to the console that's laid out in front of you. Whether you're new to On24 or a seasoned veteran of our webinar series, the layout is interactive and here to work for you. The windows that we have laid out on the screen are customizable, meaning you can move them around. Feel free to maximize them, minimize them, even reposition them to fit whatever device you're using to connect with us. And if you accidentally minimize a window, simply pop into the menu dock at the bottom of your screens to bring it right back up. We're going to try to save some time today, maybe about 10 to 15 minutes, for a Q&A discussion. So at any point during today's webinar, feel free to submit questions using that specific Q&A portal that's right there on your screen. Our session will be led by Roland Edwards, the Deputy Chief Human Capital Officer at the Department of Homeland Security, and Courtney Searles, the Federal Regional Sales Manager at Cornerstone on Demand. We're very excited to have both Roland and Courtney on for the session and can't wait for them to kick off the fireside chat. So without further ado, let's get things started. Courtney, I think the floor is yours.
Hi, Roland. I'm excited to talk with you here today. So let's kick things off. So in your long and impactful career, I'm sure you've had to deal with many system changes and moving towards the future. What has your experience been with moving into a DHS-wide platform from these various legacy systems, and how are you able to get buy-in for this challenge and other upgrades?
I really appreciate that question, Courtney, and thank you. Also, thanks to HCMG for allowing me to participate on the first digital summit. I think it shows good faith on the part of HCMG to have one of their least tech-savvy individuals participate on the first summit. So if I can do it, anybody can do it, so thank you. Really good question. So DHS, in terms of our HRIT portfolio, our Human Resources Information Technology portfolio, it has come a long way in just the last year to 2 years, where DHS was formed out of a number of existing organizations, either standalone or as a part of another agency at the time. That always presents very unique opportunities when you are trying to then build a culture and be able to use data consistently across all of those disparate organizations. And also respecting the fact that they have been in existence far longer than DHS itself. So as we've worked through those challenges and really learned how to build partnerships with our various components, we've seen challenges and we've seen a number of successes at this point. What I found is that we really, number one, have to understand the culture of the organization. So understanding what arena you're playing in across the organization. Is your senior leadership willing to take on the tough challenge of doing this across the organization? Once you are able to get that senior leadership buy-in, then you're looking at really assessing what are you working with. In our instance, we have 9 main components. Then we have 22 separate headquarters organizations. And then you tie that all in with a lot of different occupational series, and then you've got 102 different systems across the organization, not even talking about the various iterations of the systems, which technically count as different systems by the time you get through looking at them. It can become quite the complex journey. So really understanding the lay of the land, understanding what those systems are, and then beginning to iron out some of those processes. Where do you have successful practices? Where do you need to upgrade various components because maybe they have not been able to keep pace with technology? And then folding all of that in, because ultimately it's not about driving people to technically one system. It's really about making sure that you allow the technology to help them meet their mission where they are and then bring them along so that no one in the department is lagging behind. And I think we've been pretty successful at doing that. We are now at the point where we have a very robust executive steering committee for our HRIT program. And again, having that executive continuous buy-in, reaching out to the rest of the C-suite, so whether it's the procurement office or the information technology office, honestly, we would not be successful if we did not really have those strong partnerships here at DHS.
Thank you, Roland. I agree with you. It is so important. I am wondering what implementation was like with that type of environment. You mentioned getting some of those different stakeholders involved. What did that look like from an implementation perspective? Was it a little bit more siloed, or did you get everybody in the room together to help make those decisions in the implementation?
Breaking down silos, I think, is one of the most challenging things facing the federal government right now. But I do think that we've managed to do that within DHS. So it's really about scanning across, making sure that in those executive steering committees and the working group levels, that you understand what the needs and the challenges are from those various levels of folks. Ultimately, what you need is still to have that driving body and someone who's, quite frankly, willing to say, my organization needs a automated performance management system. Ours either doesn't work, it's cobbled together, or maybe we don't even have one at all. And we're willing to go first. And it's when you have those components that are willing to step up and do that, it makes the implementation less challenging. When you then bring those working groups together, it's really figuring out how do you discern what are the elements that truly are necessary across the entire enterprise. So what can you create as a foundational system? Once you're able to build the foundational system, then you kind of begin to look at, well, what are some of the nice-to-haves? And then maybe some of those nice-to-haves really impact the functionality of the system. So while it may be nice that you're able to do mass uploads very easily to actually get the system up and running, is that something that then becomes necessary, because otherwise it becomes an administrative burden for you to actually be able to implement the tool. So you take it from the basic, and then you build the core, and then you find out whether or not there are other elements that just make the system far more user-friendly. And one of the challenges also that I think that we have in the federal government is really trying to figure out how we keep an eye towards the future as we're implementing. So oftentimes we're looking at technology and rules and regulations and the technology that supports us today, but we're not trying to focus ahead and look down the line to figure out what is it that we can implement today that is going to carry us into the future. Because money is tight, and we want to make the best use of those funds so that we're really strong stewards of our taxpayer dollars, but also our time and our energy, because it's a big effort and a huge lift to do these designs. And so what we do, we want to be able to last and to meet the needs and to ultimately help us meet our mission.
That's a great point and a great segue into this next question, Roland. Obviously, having all of that executive sponsorship, and it really allows those leaders to have an investment in cultivating a workforce beyond just the technology, but what that means for the organization itself. And in my experience, by having that level of buy-in, it's allowed agencies to get faster employee adoption and really prepare their workforce for success, especially in this new retiring workforce that's been, the silver tsunami that's have been discussed over the last decade, it seems. But I'm wondering, from your perspective, with succession planning and workforce planning being one of the major priorities among human capital management right now, how are you currently dealing with replacing your workforce in this retirement cycle? And if you have any tips for the audience, that would be greatly appreciated.
Honestly, if the audience has any tips for me, I would greatly appreciate it. So, we've been looking at and anticipating the retirement tsunami for years now, like you mentioned. As we continue to look at our data and we kind of try to figure out what is that going to look like, what are the occupations of today and the future, what is technology mean for our occupations of today and the future, what we're finding that we need to do is to look at succession planning and succession management for all levels of our workforce. When you start looking at the new generation coming into the workforce, and you're trying to figure out, especially in the federal space, do you have a representative sample of that workforce in your workspace? And we're finding that we don't. And so what we're trying to figure out now as an organization is how do we master it? What is the secret sauce that's going to make this work? And I don't know that anybody has truly found it. But, we continue to learn from the private sector. We learn from other federal agencies all the time. We're developing our own succession management program here. We definitely train at all levels and try to make sure that we're preparing our workforce at all levels to take the next higher level job. And so internally, we have a talent management challenge and opportunity to make sure that we're not only training them for maybe what's next in their current trajectory, but maybe as we're moving into a brave new world, there's training and development or there's skills that our workforce has that, maybe we need to be looking and training them for a job that doesn't yet exist or that's on the horizon. Or maybe they already have the skills and we need them somewhere else. So how are we able to actually take a look at that, identify that, and begin to really pre-position our staff and help them to, number one, be more effective in their jobs, but ultimately this leads to a greater level of engagement by our employees because we're supporting them not just in their work of today and trying to keep them in a role that they're currently in, but that we're excited about helping them to move to the next level, and we're excited about developing them. Then once you kind of, and I feel like I'm going on and on, this is a passionate topic, but, it's
no,
not
I
just,
agree.
it's not just the workforce that we have right now. And so how are we going out and getting that new talent into the organization? And that's one other area where I think as a federal community we can do a lot better in partnering with the private sector as well as the school systems to really get into not just high school, not just middle school, but are we actually going down to elementary school? Are we re-energizing a workforce that is interested in federal service? Are we re-energizing them in the careers that we need? Are we helping educators to know what we're looking for? And quite frankly, this is where the private sector can help a lot because where the government resources end, I think private sector resources pick up because the same talent that we're going to need in the public sector, the private sector will also need. So really joining in partnerships so that we're able to push our messages out, get the curriculum changed, and actually developing a workforce that's going to be ready to hit the market is just where I think we need to go.
That is such a great point, Roland. I love the idea of getting in young and getting them excited about public service from a young age. I think that's an excellent idea and something that, as a community we should all move towards. Speaking of that and, your talent management solutions and getting not only, people into the government, but then continuing to have them move forward in their career and sustain, I'm wondering from your perspective, what does a successful talent management solution look like? What components might that include and how are you able to measure the success of your workforce growing with your organization?
I think that, again, it's interesting to me because in the human capital space, oftentimes what we find is that we are not viewed as being as creative as we should be in managing talent. And where I think that this stems from is that sometimes we're so wed to the existing rules of today, the systems, and while some of us have other flexibilities, I think that it's important that we're always trying to be consultants as a human capital professional. Regardless of what level we are in the human capital profession, ultimately we're still consultants. And we need to remember that our customers don't always know what they're asking for. They know what the end goal is for them, but they don't know how to get there. And we need to help them get there. So that's one thing that I think as a community we need to really be focused on. A tool would actually help us to do that better. And the tool sometimes may need to come with other authorities, and I know that across, quite frankly, across government, we've talked about how do we innovate? Is it time to modernize our system? And I think it is that time. So recruiting, onboarding, development, performance, compensation, succession management, collaboration. We have a lot of disparate systems. They're federally compliant, but do we have a system that manages them all in some unified way? And I think that that's where we need to get to, and we need to then be prepared and have a system that's adaptable enough that we're able to change to meet the needs of the future. For example, we have a cyber talent management system. And I need to caveat this very strongly. It is not an IT system. It is a personnel system, but it may have an IT component to support it. So with that, we have the authority to kind of relook at how we hire, how we retain, how we compensate within the cyber realm. And it's going to be huge. And I think it has the potential to be something that we'll be looking at and eyeing whether or not it's a model for the rest of the federal government to move towards. Because it's an innovative way of thinking. Are we looking at the traditional way of classification? No. We may be making changes to that. Are we looking at the traditional way of compensation? Well, no. We know that that is not effective right now for some of these high-demand careers. Are we looking at a lifetime of federal service? Well, no. That's not necessarily what the next generations are looking for. And so it's really taking this model, looking at it from a lens of, are there successful practices, and how do we, number one, make sure that we implement it correctly here within DHS, but then moving forward, is this a model that it's time for us to look at for the entire federal government?
That's a great point, and another great segue. You mentioned, being adaptable and creative and, finding the right people and continuing to grow them in your organization. I'm interested with the recent news about Amazon moving into the DMV area. I've been talking to a lot of agencies over the past few weeks about how that's going to impact their recruiting and their retainment of talent. And I'm wondering what you might recommend for attracting and retaining your top talent at your organization, and what others might be able to do as well with this new Amazon complex coming to town.
I, for one, am excited. So I think that whenever you have such a huge player as Amazon coming to your local area, you become a place of interest for the talent to actually go in the first place. So when you're able to then become that location, geographic location of choice, then you end up having a broader pool to select from. The other thing is that we have a lot of local universities. I am anticipating that they are going to begin really focusing their curriculum on those areas of growth that Amazon will be bringing to the area. So again, that creates more of a supply in this area for us to choose from. Now, once we get that supply in the area, how are we then able to actually get the top talent to come in for us? And again, this is where I think the federal government being a lot more innovative in how we recruit, how we compensate, and how we retain is going to be key to our success. I think that in terms of recruiting, which we do now, but we need to do a lot better. We need to understand, how is talent out there actually looking for jobs? How are they seeking those opportunities? And are we positioned? We recently had a session with some millennials, and I would love to have just a short conversation about the millennial population, and I'll do that in just a minute. But so I was amazed that some of the federal postings pull through on the job boards, but what's pulling through on the job boards and what's kind of upfront and present on those job boards is not the information that they want to see in order to determine whether or not they want to click further. So we've got to do a better job of really understanding that top talent and what information we need and how we are going to actually be able to entice them to even click to find out what our opportunities are. The second thing is that, what I'm finding is that people are really drawn to the federal government for the mission. It's not going to be for the pay ultimately. They've got to try to compensate as well as you can, but ultimately where we need to do a much better job is really pushing the mission and letting our talent know what missions we have, how vitally important they are to the federal government, to this nation. And then compensation. I think that, again, we've got to continue for, especially these mission-critical occupations of ours, we've got to continue to push to make sure that we are looking at the market, that we are truly understanding what is competitive compensation and pay, and we need to do our best to try to be as competitive as possible. And then our workplace flexibilities will go along with that to help make us far more marketable.
Well said, Roland, and I absolutely agree. I think it's so important, especially with this wave of people moving to the area, whether it's Amazon employees or their spouses or their families. I think it's going to be so important to continue to drive that mission in retaining and attracting more people to work for the government.
Absolutely. Can I throw one thing in there, our millennial workforce?
Absolutely.
One thing that I want to say is we need to stop beating up our millennial workforce. So many times I think they get a bad rap. And when I look back and, I see all the studies about what millennials are looking for, it's the same thing I want. It's the same thing I wanted when I was then, and they are the same struggles that I faced when I was at their age. Recently there was a presentation, and the presentation was really about it's not just millennials, it's really about the 20-something age range. And so it's that you're just leaving the nest, you're uncertain, you've been in a structured environment, and what are we doing to support that age range, regardless of what label we've given that group? But what are we giving that age range to support them? And do we have a workforce that looks like them when they're coming in to interview us or when they're looking on our websites to see if they're even interested in our organizations? And so as we're continuing to look to see whether or not we can attract them, we've got to pay attention to that and really be able to sell that with them as they're looking at us as an employer of choice.
Well said. Yep.
Excellent. So with that, let's roll over into some attendee questions. So we've got a couple on the docket, and let's dive into this first one. This question reads, is the federal government currently positioned to compete for top talent? How so? Or if not, what is needed?
Yeah, no, thank you. I definitely think that right now we are not doing what we need to do to compete for top talent. I think that we need to do a far better job of advertising and not just posting and doing passive posting on USA Jobs. And then I think once we're able to really focus on that, I think that we're going to find that when we're going out to the groups that we're looking for, we're going to find that we're going to have a much better chance of competing for the top talent that we need. Overall, would love to see us really look at whether or not, as a federal government, our systems are what they need to be, our compensation, how we do classification. Is it what's needed right now in order for us to continue to compete going into the future?
Excellent. All right, let's dive into our next attendee question. And this one reads, again, another one for you, Roland. How does DHS work with OPM to meet its talent management needs?
Interesting. And so I'm sure everyone has kind of heard what's happening with the Office of Personnel Management and whether or not it does or does not belong under the Office of Management and Budget, which part of it really does belong under the General Services. So I think that taking all of that out of the equation, I think that OPM provides the oversight and the adherence to the rules and the regulations that we need in order to actually meet our daily human capital needs. And they're also very strong partners with us. And so where we need flexibilities, whether there's a direct hire for the acquisition workforce, whether it's we got our cyber talent management system authority, but OPM still provides really great guidance and has a large-scale expertise in a workforce that just really knows Title V and the federal government and also alternative personnel systems. There's just been an amazing wealth of knowledge that we need to learn how to really tap into more so as a federal community.
Excellent. All right, a couple more questions just came through. So this next one reads, what components are included in Unified Talent Management?
Roland, if you don't mind, I'll take that one.
I appreciate that.
Sure. So I guess it depends on how your organization reads the idea of unified talent management. From my perspective and from Cornerstone's perspective, it really encompasses what touches the employee. How are they engaging with your organization and moving through their career? You want to start things off with, of course, recruiting. And then onboarding, I think, is something that is often overlooked. It's not just forms and getting them a laptop. It really is getting them, it's your first touch point for this new hire, and getting them excited about your organization, getting them involved in some trainings, tying some social collaboration pieces in there so that they can start connecting with other employees and feeling that community of your agency. So I think that's a big one that is sometimes often overlooked. Of course, learning management and keeping them trained on these different skills and competencies. And then, of course, performance. You need to give them some feedback on how they're doing and how they need to improve. And then, there's some more admin agency-specific components around compensation, workforce planning, headcount planning. But really, it needs to be defined by your agency and how you think that your employees are going to get the best and the most out of their job, and how you as an HR professional can help and guide them along their career to be successful within your organization.
Excellent. All right, and this next question is actually kind of related to that previous one. This one reads, why is it important to combine these elements?
I guess I'll just continue on there. I think it's so important, and this ties into what Roland was mentioning earlier about unifying these systems. I think the biggest thing it comes down to is analytics and starting to understand what your agency is doing and how to get the most bang for your buck. We are in an industry where budgets are tight and each dollar is really important and needs to be spent thoughtfully. And so by having these systems connected, you can run some reports and really understand your analytics of, okay, we took this course and this training. How does this help improve this employee's competency for X? Did they enjoy this training? Did this move them along in this particular career path? I think by having a system of unification. It allows HR professionals in the back end to really take a closer look at what they're doing to help promote and move their employees along in their career. And by having that level of analytics of joint systems talking to each other, I think that gives them a better picture of what they're doing and how they can improve. And then from an employee perspective, I think it's so important and impactful as an employee to go in and, of course, with that ease of use, having everything at their fingertips, whether it's taking a training or, conducting a performance review, but to see where they currently are in their job and in their skill set, and then what they might need for the future so that they can start preparing and planning. What courses do they need to take so that they can become a manager or an executive? What skills might they need to be interested in or start developing? Maybe they're looking to make a more lateral move and go to a different department. What do we need to do from an HR perspective? What can they look at to help them move in that level of type of career? So having the systems talk and really be unified, I think helps from an HR perspective for reporting and understanding your business and what you're putting out to your individuals. And from an employee perspective, it really gives them a clear picture of their career and how they can get there.
Yeah, and if I could just chime in, I agree with everything that you just said. And I think one of the places that we would love to be able to get to is really a true sense of predictive analytics as well. And so kind of taking the data and trying to figure out where is it that we're going as an organization. Where are you going to need more resources? Where are you going to have more attrition coming up? Where do you need to put more of your emphasis? Are you providing the right compensation? Are you providing the right types of benefits for your employees, and really looking at how all of that data flows through as opposed to individual systems is just huge. So thank you for that.
Excellent. And looks like we have time for one more attendee question, and I really wanted to ask this one specifically for you, Roland. This one reads, if you could go back to the start of your career, what would you have found helpful to get you to where you are today?
Perhaps just taking the time to actually think about my career. I think that most of us find that over time, I don't know that anyone went into high school and college saying, "Gee, I'm going to be an HR professional when I graduate, and I'm going to be the deputy CHCO for the Department of Homeland Security." That really wasn't my path, and so I think that. One, I want to encourage that where folks can either find a mentor or be a mentor, it's huge. And then the other part is that where we can really develop for all of our professional series, and every staff member deserves to know what's next for them. They deserve to be well-trained. They deserve to be developed. They deserve to be asked, what is it that they want for their career, and where we can help them get there. We need to do everything we can to do that. So I know that for me, there have just been folks along the way who have helped me to really shape me, to help guide me, even when I didn't know that I needed guidance. And so I think that that's the biggest thing for me, is to really go back. If I were to go back again, I would have really sought out those mentors more actively and really taken a lot more control of my career early on, as opposed to just taking what came and at this point being grateful that it did lead me here ultimately. So.
Wonderful. So we're nearing the end of today's session. I know there's a couple of questions that we weren't able to get to, but we will follow up, post-Digital Summit Day to carry on with the conversation. If you signed on to catch our next session in today's summit, we scheduled some time for a break before we kick off at 2 p.m. I wanted to give just a really big shout out and a really big thanks to our audience for joining us today, for sending through some really amazing questions. And also, let's not forget a huge thank you to the Cornerstone OnDemand team, and especially Courtney and Roland for hosting such an amazing conversation. As I mentioned, we'll be in touch shortly to follow up on the conversation. We also have a very short survey at the closeout of this particular session, so feel free to add any feedback from the discussion from today, or if there's anything you want to see in future sessions or our future digital summits. Just another note, if you haven't signed up for our 2 p.m. session featuring the National Science Foundation and the U.S. Department of Defense, please make sure to click on the link in the Resource Center portal and reserve your digital seat. Thanks again so much for joining the session, and until next time, everyone, catch you later.